Picture this. You're sitting pretty thinking your defenses are, top-notch impenetrable. Then bam, something comes screaming at you at 5 times the speed of sound. It's a total game changer. We're talking about hypersonic weapons, and today we're going to take a deep dive into America's first operational hypersonic system. It's the LRHW, also known as the Dark Eagle. So what exactly is it that makes a weapon hypersonic? Well, it's not just about speed, although. Mach 5 and above is definitely a key factor. We're talking over 3,800 miles per hour. But it's that incredible speed combined with long range and maneuverability that makes these weapons so difficult to detect and intercept. It's a whole new ballgame for defense systems. Now, when we talk about hypersonic weapons, there are 2 main types. You've got hypersonic cruise missiles, and then you've got hypersonic glide vehicles, HGVs for short. And the Dark Eagle falls into that second category, the HGVs. Now, it's important to understand that we're not just talking about a single missile here. The Dark Eagle is a complete system. Each part has a specific and crucial role to play. Let's start with the transporter erector launchers. You know those TALs we always hear about. These are essentially mobile launch platforms mounted on trailers, and each one carries 2 Dark Eagle missiles. Imagine these things deployed out in the field, ready to move at a moment's notice and launch these hypersonic payloads. Then there's the missile itself, a 2-stage system. The first stage is a booster rocket. Interestingly, it's been adapted from existing Navy technology. This booster's job is to propel the second stage, the Common Hypersonic Glide Body, CHGB, high above the atmosphere. And that CHGB, well, that's where things get really interesting. The CHGB is a result of years and years of research and development. It detaches from the booster up there in the atmosphere, and then it glides back down towards its target. And it can do that so fast and so low that enemy defenses might not even have time to react. It's pretty remarkable stuff. But now the question becomes, why did the U.S. even go down this path? Why spend so much time and money developing this complex system? Well, the need for speed, it wasn't just some random idea. The Dark Eagle is a direct response to a very specific concern and a growing one. China's military power. They've been rapidly developing their capabilities, and particularly their focus on something called anti-accessory denial. You'll often hear it shortened A2AD. So what does A2AD actually mean in practice? Think of it this way. China's trying to establish zones where they can effectively block any opposing forces, like the U.S., from operating safely. Their goal is to have control over these areas by denying access to ships and aircraft. It's a serious challenge. And the Dark Eagle, well, it's designed to break through those defenses. Let's walk through a hypothetical scenario so you can really see how this might work. Okay, so imagine you're in command of a Dark Eagle battery. Conflict breaks out, and you've got a high-value target that needs to be neutralized. It's deep inside enemy territory, heavily protected by all those A2AD capabilities we were talking about. You receive your orders, your team scrambles into action to get a TEL into position. They confirm that the target is within range. And the Dark Eagle has quite a reach, by the way, an operational range of over 1,700 miles. That's a lot of ground to cover. And then with a roar, that Navy-derived booster launches the CHGB skyward. It climbs rapidly higher and higher into the atmosphere. It keeps pushing until it reaches that designated altitude. And that's when the booster separates and the CHGB begins its descent. But it doesn't just follow a simple ballistic trajectory. It glides back down towards the target, maneuvering through the thinner air of the upper atmosphere. Too fast, too low flying for enemy defenses to react effectively. At least that's the idea. Back at your battery operations center, you're monitoring everything very closely. The CHGB's progress is being meticulously tracked. And if needed, you can even make course adjustments. You need to make sure it stays locked onto that target. And then with its incredible speed and precision, the CHGB reaches its destination, delivers its payload, and the threat is neutralized. It's a mission accomplished. Now, you might think developing and deploying a system like this would be relatively straightforward, but the reality, it's way more complex. Creating and fielding cutting-edge military technology like the Dark Eagle comes with its fair share of challenges, and this program, it's no exception. So initially, the Dark Eagle project, it actually moved pretty quickly. The Army, they were smart. They leveraged existing technology. For both the booster and that CHGB we talked about, that allowed them to get a test flight off the ground pretty early on back in June 2022. It's a pretty fast turnaround when you think about how complex these weapon systems are. But that first test, it hit a snag. There was a problem with the booster, which meant that the CHGB couldn't even be deployed. It was a setback for sure. But I guess it's also a good reminder that developing cutting-edge technology like this, it's rarely ever a smooth process. The second test, thankfully, went much more smoothly. But getting to full operational readiness that's been pushed back, it really shows you just how complex this hypersonic technology is and all the rigorous testing that's required to make sure it's reliable. These weapons, they have incredible destructive potential. We can't just rush into things. Now let's zoom out a little bit and think about the bigger picture here. The Dark Eagle, It comes with a pretty hefty price tag. The estimate's around $6.9 billion for just 66 missiles. And that raises a pretty big question. Is all this investment, is it really justified? Especially when we consider all the other things that need funding in defense budgets. There's some experts out there who aren't so sure. They point out that the Dark Eagle's cost effectiveness, well, it's debatable, especially when you compare it to other weapon systems that are out there. And it's a valid point, You've got to make sure that even with the most advanced technology, we're getting real value in a strategic sense. Then there's also the whole issue of basing these weapons. Where do they go? Trying to deploy the Dark Eagle in strategic locations around the world. Well, it could create some pretty significant diplomatic challenges. The U.S. would need to get agreements from other countries to host these weapons. And there could be pushback, even the potential for increased regional tensions. It's definitely something to consider. And, beyond all the technical stuff and the logistics, the Dark Eagle brings up some even bigger questions. Well, the future of warfare itself. Hypersonic weapons with their speed and maneuverability. They represent a huge shift in military thinking. Some people argue that they're absolutely essential
for maintaining dominance in 21st century warfare. They see them as a necessary deterrent, especially when you've got adversaries like China who are rapidly developing their own hypersonic capabilities. They got to keep up right. But then you've got others who are a little more cautious. They're worried about the potential for an arms race as more and more countries try to develop and deploy these weapons. And that's a valid concern, Could this kind of competition destabilize the global security environment? Could it make the world a more dangerous and unpredictable place? It's definitely something worth thinking about. And then, of course, there are the ethical considerations. Hypersonic weapons, by their very nature, they're designed to inflict massive damage. That speed the destructive payloads. It raises concerns about unintended consequences and collateral damage. Even if you've got the most sophisticated targeting systems in the world, there's always a risk that innocent civilians could be caught in the crossfire. It's not something to be taken lightly. Now let's bring our focus back to the Dark Eagle specifically. We've talked about the TLs, the two-stage missile, the whole development process.
But there's another crucial piece of the puzzle that we need to talk about. The command and control system. This is the network that allows military leaders to do a few key things. First, they can track the Dark Eagle's trajectory. They can monitor its progress and even make adjustments to its course while it's in flight. It's a seriously sophisticated system. It relies on advanced sensors communication networks, real-time data processing. If you didn't have this system, the Dark Eagle wouldn't be nearly as effective. Okay, so picture yourself back in that scenario we talked about before. You're the officer in charge of the Dark Eagle battery. You've got your orders and you're about to launch that hypersonic missile. But before you give the final go-ahead, you've got to make sure that everything is absolutely ready. You check in with your command and control team. They're going to have a clear track on the missile's trajectory and be ready to monitor its progress throughout the entire flight. You've also got to make sure you have a secure way to communicate with your superiors so you can provide updates on the mission and receive any instructions that come in. It's a high-stakes situation for sure.
You've got to be precise and vigilant every step of the way. So you run through all your checklists, make sure all systems are green. And then you take a deep breath and give the order to fire. The booster ignites and you can feel that shockwave in the air. The Dark Eagle shoots up into the sky, disappears almost instantly. You can watch its trajectory on your monitors, arcing upwards through the atmosphere. A few moments later, the CHGB separates from the booster, starts its descent. Your command and control team, they're locked on, tracking every single move, sending you real-time updates. Everything's going according to plan, at least for now. But then something happens, something you didn't expect. The target, it was stationary, but now it's moving. It's trying to escape that incoming hypersonic weapon. What do you do? How do you respond to this sudden change? But this is where that Dark Eagle's maneuverability really comes into play. You've got to communicate with your command and control team immediately. They make adjustments to the CHGB's trajectory on the fly, guiding it towards that moving target. The CHGB, because of its design, those powerful control systems.
It can make sharp turns. It can change its course mid-flight. Keeps tracking that target, relentlessly closing the distance. And then boom, pinpoint accuracy. The CHGB strikes, neutralizes the threat. Mission success. This scenario, it really highlights one of the key advantages of hypersonic weapons. Their agility when things don't go as planned. That speed, the maneuverability, it makes them incredibly hard to defend against. It gives you a huge advantage in combat. But as we talked about before, there's another side to all this. The cost, the potential for an arms race, all those ethical issues we talked about, those are serious things, and we can't just brush them aside. The development and deployment of hypersonic weapons like the Dark Eagle, It's a whole new chapter in the history of warfare. It's a chapter with both opportunities and risks. It's something we're going to be talking about and debating for years to come. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of hypersonic weapons. We've covered a lot of ground so far, the tech behind it, the strategies, the ethical questions. But there's one more layer I want to peel back here.
We talked about the Dark Eagle as America's answer to China's A2AD strategy, right? But what about the bigger picture? How does all this fit into the global landscape of hypersonic weapons development? The truth is, the U.S. isn't the only player in this game. Other major powers out there, they're also pouring tons of resources into hypersonic tech. Take Russia, for instance. They're already claiming to have deployed hypersonic missiles. And China. Well, their hypersonic programs are moving ahead pretty fast, too. And that brings us to a very real concern, the possibility of an arms race. As these weapons have become more widespread, it's not hard to imagine a scenario where tensions start to rise, and we end up with a much more dangerous and unpredictable world. We've got to remember that hypersonic weapons aren't just theoretical. They're not just some cool new tech. They have the potential to completely change the balance of power, and that could reshape the entire global security landscape. So the big question is, where do we go from here? What can we do to try and minimize the risks and make sure these incredibly powerful technologies are used responsibly?
While some experts out there, they think arms control agreements are the way to go, kind of like the ones that have been pretty successful in limiting the spread of nuclear weapons. The idea is that these agreements could help to set some boundaries, put some limits on the development and deployment of hypersonic weapons, and hopefully reduce the risk of a full-blown arms race. Then there are others who say we need to focus on strengthening our defenses. The thinking is if countries can develop effective ways to counter hypersonic weapons, well, that would make them less strategically valuable, less tempting to use as offensive weapons. It's an interesting argument, but at the end of the day, figuring out how to deal with the challenges posed by these weapons is going to take a multi-pronged approach: diplomacy, tech, innovation, and a really clear-eyed assessment of the risks and what could happen if things go wrong. It's a tough task, no doubt, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore. The stakes are just too high. So as we wrap up this deep dive into hypersonic weapons, I really encourage you to keep learning about this stuff. Read up on it, talk to people about it, think about what it all means for the world, because the future of warfare, it's being shaped right now. And the decisions we make today, they're going to have a huge impact for generations to come. Thanks for joining me on this exploration of the world of hypersonic weapons. Until next time, keep exploring.